Go.
Racism oppresses its victims, but it also binds the oppressor, who swear their conscience with more and more lies, until they become prisoners of those lies. They cannot face the truth of human equality, because it reveals the horrors and the injustice they have committed. A quote by the niece of Martin Luther King, Alveda King. When we think of racism, we think of something in the past, something that happened many, many years ago, something that no longer exists, or it exists in the movies, or something that probably only existed in America a few years ago. Unfortunately, you were wrong. If you analyze any country and take a look into their history, you will see how racism slowly creeps into the most fundamental values of the social, moral, and economic structures of any society. Brazil is a beautiful country with a very rich and diverse background. Brazil's diverse populations comes from European, indigenous, and African roots. This makes the country very multicultural, but underneath the multiculturalism view, African and indigenous people are constantly faced with discrimination and inequality. To further analyze the subject, we will go into it by looking at the multiculturalistic view, the indigenous people, and the African people of Brazil. First of all, Brazil is internationally recognized for its landscape, environment, biodiversity, models, athletes, dance, and the Carnaval of the Rio de Janeiro. Instead of being known for this, it should be known for its very beautiful and ethnic and diverse ethnic background. Right here, I have a couple of pictures from models and athletes and famous people from Brazil.
You're going to pass that around? You might not get that back.
And when you get it back, it's going to be sticky. Huh?
In a study conducted by the Brazilian Census in 2000, they found that in Brazil there are over 135 different skin tones in the population. In an attempt to annihilate racism, they embraced the idea of a racial democracy. This idea grew in the 20th century when it was believed that all its different races would unite and become one, which is the cosmic race. Instead of unifying the country, it divided it by excluding people of African and indigenous backgrounds. Which brings us to our second point, the indigenous people of Brazil. In 1500, Brazil became a colony of the Portuguese Empire. According to historian Hageman, approximately 2.5 million people lived in Brazil at this time. Some of the indigenous tribes would go and marry off their women to white settlers in order to make relationships with them. The children between the settlers and the indigenous became known as mestizos. Many mestizos assimilated into the mainstream Brazilian society, while other tribes started to retreat into remote locations. According to the 2000 Brazil census, the indigenous population is approximately 750,000, representing only 4% of the total population. According to Tells and Bailey, Indio translates to barbaric or uncivilized. Therefore, self-identifying oneself as indigenous brings a lot of negative stigma. It was not until 1991 when the indigenous people were officially recognized as a race by the Brazilian government. Although the indigenous are the original Brazilians, they are treated as second or third class citizens and face a great amount of discrimination. Which gets us into our third point, people of African ancestry. People of African ancestry make up 50% of the population, yet they face the most amount of racism and equality than any other group. Their story in Brazil starts with the transatlantic slave trade that brought over 4 million African slaves to Brazil, making it the largest concentration of African slaves in the world. According to the 2000 Brazilian census, only 6% of the population identifies themselves as black, when 50% of the population, as mentioned before, is actually from an African ancestry. According to Tells and Bailey's, most have renounced their black identity because they do not want to deal with the negative stigma of being black. The lighter your skin, the more likely it is that you will have access to a better life and education, and the easier it will become to assimilate into the mainstream Brazilian society. A research conducted by Diaz Beltran Sanchez and Kawachi revealed that whites have a monthly average income that is 84% higher than whites.
Boom, that just